Basically what it comes down to is this, Tom. St. Robert Bellarmine actually responded to the question, and the question was whether a pope could be a heretic and still retain the papacy or not. Okay? Right. St. Robert Bellarmine raised 5 different answers. There are 5 different opinions in his work, The Controversies of the Christian Faith. This is the general controversy, number 3, the third general controversy about the papacy, about the authority of the Pope. And in raising these, he pointed out that they are legitimate opinions. I mean, it's not as though anything has been dogmatically defined by the Church. So the fact that he says these are 5 different opinions puts them on the table as though they are opinions that a Catholic could hold, okay, and still be Catholic. And the first opinion on the matter he attributes to, the name is somewhat unfortunate in English. His name is Pigius, P-I-G-H-I-U-S, a theologian who said that a pope, once a man becomes a pope, he can never lose the faith. He can never defect from the faith. He can never become a heretic. Okay? So his opinion was that a pope would be protected from ever losing the faith. That's the first opinion. And St. Robert Bellarmine said that he favors that opinion, personally, okay? He says that that is certainly a worthy opinion, but he doesn't say it's the common opinion. And he says because it's not the common opinion among all the theologians and so on, he says there are other possible opinions, and notably the opinion that, yes, a man could become the Pope, and then as Pope he can defect and lose the faith. The question was when he loses the faith, does he also lose the papacy? So he says that let's assume then that the first opinion is wrong, that says that a pope cannot, once he's the pope, ever defect from the faith. Let's say it's possible that a man who is a pope could defect from the faith. He said, what then? And the next 4 opinions involve that, the eventuality of a pope losing the faith. And he goes on to the opinion of Torquemada, who says that if a pope were to lose the faith by denying, doctrines of the faith, even privately, even clandestinely, so then no one knew that he was a pope. So he was an occult heretic, and a cult not in the sense of the modern parlance, but a cult meaning a hidden heretic, that he would still have lost the papacy immediately as soon as he consented to heresy, even privately, even if he didn't tell anybody. Both Taylor Marshall and Ryan Grant point out that this is wrong, and they cite St. Robert Bellarmine, who says that that opinion cannot be so. And actually, it's easy to see why. I mean, it's not as though it was condemned by the Church, but they say logically it is wrong, because that would mean if a man could become the Pope, lose the faith, and therefore lose the papacy, and no one would know it, then the entire Church would be following a false Pope. Right. And this is, they say, this would not work. Okay, and you can see why. I mean, I think anybody would say, yeah, that's true. If a man, even for a private heresy, let alone a manifest heresy, but a private heresy that no one knows about, would lose the papacy, then the whole Church could be led astray without even being aware of it. St. Robert Bellarmine dismisses that opinion. Then they go on to the third position, and that position is, well, not only could the Pope become a heretic, secretly, he could become a manifest heretic and openly espouse heresy, but there is nothing you could do about it. There are no consequences for it. He would still remain the Pope. He would have all the authority of the papacy, and yes, you'd have the obligation to obey. Now, this seems very much like what Bishop Schneider was advocating, right? Yes. And but this is one opinion which St. Robert Bellarmine just says is absolutely untenable, because it is absolutely clear, it is certain, it is the common teaching of the Church, the fathers and doctors of the Church and so on, that the faith is necessary to be a Catholic, having the faith, and that being a Catholic is absolutely necessary to be a pope, because you have to be a member of the church to be the head of the church on earth. And if you are a heretic, you cannot be a member of the church. I mean, the faith is a constitutive, it's an essential element. It's like an ontological requirement, okay, to be a Catholic, and therefore to be a pope. So he rules this out entirely and says that, no, you cannot say, well, I mean, he doesn't say that holding that opinion makes one a heretic or anything like that. He doesn't take that off the table, but he just says, in his estimation, he says, in his estimation, that is an untenable position, that one could defect from the faith manifestly, notoriously, and still retain the papacy, because he couldn't even retain his membership in the church at that point. Remember, we talked about that recently, yep. And that opinion of Peter Kwasniewski, exactly. Right? Yeah. Who, of all the men on earth, required less faith of a pope than anybody else. That you and I could become heretics and be excommunicated, but Francis, for example, could be a heretic and still be the pope, with no consequences whatsoever. So this opinion, this position, St. Robert Bellarmine completely ruled out in his own mind. And so then he went on to the fourth position. And the fourth position he attributed to Cajetan, a great theologian, who said that, yes, a pope could lose the faith, he could defect from the faith, and by the very fact that he defected from the faith, he would also defect from the papacy. He would lose the office of the papacy. In a sense, he would depose himself by the loss of faith. But Cajetan said that even a manifestly heretical pope would still need some declaration from some authority in the church to make it clear to everyone that he was a manifest heretic. Mm-hmm. And so Cajetan said that the church that there'd have to be a council. You're talking about bishops, members of the hierarchy would have to meet, and they would have to declare that he was no longer the pope because he had lost the faith. Now, I've got to be careful here, because I don't know if he actually, exactly the wording that he used there, I'd have to go back and read this question, but St. Robert Bellarmine did not accept that position. This seemed to savor of conciliarism, and conciliarism was a condemned doctrine, or a condemned idea, condemned by the church, that a council could actually impeach a pope, could actually judge a pope and depose him. But a council can't, because the supreme pontiff is supreme. And he can't be judged by any council or anything like that. So they thought that this opinion savored of conciliarism, that it gave too much authority to a council, as though it was a superior of a pope, as though it had the authority to depose him. Robert Bellarmine did not condemn the idea, he just said, I don't agree with it. So they went on to the fifth opinion. The fifth position was what St. Robert Bellarmine says he espoused. And the fifth opinion was that, yes, a pope could defect from the faith, and in losing the faith and becoming a manifest heretic, he would lose the papacy, and he would no longer be the pope at that moment that he assented to heresy, and it was a manifest heresy. It occurs to me that I might have misspoken when it came to the question of the pope losing his office when he consented to his heresy. That statement might lend itself to interpretation that I follow the second opinion as given by St. Robert Bellarmine, that an occult heretic would lose his office as pope, even if he did not manifest that heresy in any way. We said that that opinion was not acceptable. Were that the case, the Pope could become an occult heretic, meaning a hidden heretic, so that no one knew of his internal heresy, that the entire church could be led astray into following a man who was secretly a heretic and therefore, in fact, not the Pope at all. I do not subscribe to that position, neither did St. Robert Bellarmine. And I don't mean to say that by consenting to a heresy, a man automatically loses the papacy. What I meant to say is that if he manifests that heresy, if he professes it, teaches it, and does so obstinately and will not be corrected, if he knows that it is heretical and he is confronted with the heresy, but he insists on continuing to profess what is in fact heresy, he becomes a manifest heretic. And at that point, as St. Robert Bellarmine says, he would lose the papacy. But again, I don't want to indicate that at a moment that a man consents to heresy internally, he would lose the office of the papacy. I agree with St. Robert Bellarmine that when he manifests that heresy, so that it is patent, or at least open to all, that he is a heretic, then they could recognize that, in fact, he is not, in fact, the Roman pontiff. A very wise gentleman also pointed out something. Well, you know, looking at the first position, okay, that a pope cannot be a heretic, he said, well, you know, you look at the situation where a man is not the pope, but he could be elected the pope. Can he be a heretic first? And as a heretic, can he be elected a pope? Well, the answer would be no, because the pope has to be a Catholic. He's a member of the church, right? So they could not elect a heretic to be the pope. The question that arose with the first position as presented in St. Robert Bellarmine's work was, could a man who is the pope become a heretic? And as I mentioned, he cites Pigius as saying, no, it can't happen. And St. Robert Bellarmine thought that had merit. But then someone mentioned, well, in a sense it's true, because if a pope became a manifest heretic, well, then he wouldn't be the pope. So the pope still would not be a heretic, and the heretic would not be the pope, right? So maybe in that sense, Pigius was correct, that if a man were a heretic, he could not be elected pope. If he were the pope, he could not become a heretic. If he became a heretic, he wouldn't be the pope. So you can't have in the same man at the same time the papacy and heresy in any one of those scenarios, right? I guess St. Robert Bellarmine's theological instincts could be gravitating toward the first position. You could give him some merit for that. That wouldn't rule out the fifth position either, though. That if a pope were to become a heretic, he would cease immediately being the pope. He couldn't be the pope and a heretic at the same time.